in that spring and early summer period. So that's the other ask, is to ask people to email the minister, and if they've made a picture of a bird and want to include that, that would be great. And just start a process. It can go across Canada. It's a federal law of people saying, we're paying attention, we want real protection. We're tired of laws that don't protect, but just appear to and are a sop, because we can't afford to go on treating nature this way. So I think that's probably enough from me. Do people have things they want to say and questions and stuff?
I had one question, Nina, about the 40,000 acres that have been logged since the Leahy report. Is that on Crown land?
Yes. And actually, to be accurate, they've been approved for.
Okay.
Because they don't keep track. So I have very little doubt that that much has been logged in that time, because some of them would have been approved earlier and would have been logged during that span. There's a lot of missing transparency. It's extremely difficult to put together information about what's happening in the forests and who's profiting.
Is there any other province or country even that has this silent time you're talking about?
There isn't another province, and I don't think there's a whole country, but I should have done more research on this. I think that there are other parts of other countries that have been experimenting with it. It was when the forestry stewardship certification really meant something before it got co-opted. It was a built-in part of the forestry stewardship certification. So this is not a completely kind of off in left field idea. And the MacPhail, if you're interested in it, the MacPhail Forest Project in PEI has an interesting website and interesting information about it.
Because if you're writing a letter or anything, it's often helpful to quote other places that do this, and more enlightened places as examples.
That's true.
Carol,
I know that on the West Coast, especially around the Wet'suwet'en territory, they've had a tremendous amount of difficulty holding the line on traditional Indigenous land from the clear cutting. They have to keep going back to court over and over again, and the companies, they go from McMillan Blodell to a different company and to a different company. Most of them based in the States, but some of them are international as well. And the government keeps propping up the companies, and the Indigenous traditional people are having to scrape together money after money to fight this in the courts. And the same in Ontario with Temagami. It's just, it seems to be pervasive that the governments are always backing the companies because it's the economical gain, and the Indigenous people and the environmentalists are having to come up with buckets of money to fight what is actually their rights. So they shouldn't even have to be fighting. And I'm wondering, in the Atlantic provinces, is the Healthy Forest Coalition, do you have any support from Indigenous groups or other environmental groups, as the people did with the fracking and with the waters?
We don't so much have groups engaged, as members in the Healthy Forest Coalition, but we certainly have sort of efforts of alliance with. So the province has handed over some Crown land to Mi'kmaq groups, both in Southwest Nova and one other place in the province, for management by indigenous groups, and we're trying to work out how that connection can work.
So are the indigenous communities through all the Passamaquoddy, the Wolastoq, the Mi'kmaq, are they aware of how dire things are on Crown land, and that, I mean, they're so stretched, I guess, with protecting other issues as well?
Yes, I mean, the great generous gift to the Mi'kmaq people in southwest Nova Scotia of a bunch of forests that they could manage. They were given land that had already been clear cut. Most of it. It was not the, you know, or still valuable forest land. It was surprise, surprise, right?
Yeah.
I think people are pretty stretched. I mean, I think there's, I have a friend who's Mi'kmaq from Millbrook, and he's been talking about connecting with the forest manager there. So it's sort of trying to find those threads, but it hasn't been as direct a connection as, say, with the water protectors.
They're just trying to protect their own lives these days.
Yeah, yeah.
What about the private woodlot owners? Are they opposed anymore? At one point there was a lot of private woodlot owner cooperatives. Is that exist at all anymore?
Yes, the private woodlot ownership. It's very tricky because I'm trying to remember what the statistics are, and I don't remember them, but I think it's about half of the private woodlots are owned by quite large companies who clear cut. And most of the others are owned by much smaller woodlot owners. We, for example, own 120 acres. And those people, the government and the forestry industry spends quite a lot of time complaining about, because they don't seem to want to just have forestry come in and clear cut their forests. They seem to be just refusing to make their forests be, you know, economically productive, and instead they seem to want to sit on them and protect them, and too nervous of the ethics and integrity of any of the forestry around to let anyone near them. Which is a perfectly good way of preserving a forest. One of the best things you can do is not mess with it.
So that it used to be much, much higher. Small private woodlot owners used to be much higher than 50%. But if we still have 50% of our forest in small woodlot owners, that's a very high percentage in Canada. I'm just wondering, are there, see, I'm really out of touch with this. Are there a lot of old stand forests there?
No.
Okay. Now there would be some. I know some woodlot owners, they have protected their forests at all costs.
I'm sorry, go on.
Some woodlot owners would have protected their forest and biodiversity at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
When they probably could have made a lot of money about it. But I'm just curious to know if that's a strong lobby voice, or if you're connected with them, or are you dealing with Crown lands? Talking about.
No, we are connected. It's hard to. So there's, for example, the Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners and Operators Association, which I'm a member of. And then they are connected with the Western Woodlot Cooperative Service, which has a wonderful forester called Patricia Amera, who really knows her stuff and is very open to managing forests for conservation values. The decks are a little bit stacked because, and in fact, there's been a move to make this even more so. The way that property taxes work is there's a very low rate for resource forest. I think it's 25 cents per $100 of valuation. And it used to be that just was, if you were sitting on some forest, it would be considered resource forest. But lately, partly because there's been this push to get industry hands on the fiber quote that's on private land, there's been more of a demand that people have to have a woodlot management plan in place, which tends to imply that cutting is going to happen. And if your plan says no, you're going to protect, and you don't want cutting to happen, there's a pretty good chance that you lose the resource rate tax rate. And that's really clearly something that needs to change, that people should be getting the preferential tax rate for protecting. And in fact, if you have your woodlot clear cut, you should really lose that resource rate.
So is there any movement on that? Because that seems to me to be a really strong point. So to recognize people that are protecting their woodlot and that they would get special consideration that way. Is there any movement that way?
Not a lot. The Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners and Operators Association actually have opened something which, for some slightly obscure reason, they called the Family Center, to try to educate and reach out to woodlot owners, and I think also maybe to build some constituency for talking about that. My own guess is that that's going to have to come as part of a bigger package of how do we support conservation and be part of protecting 30% of lands and forests by 2030, which is, you know, the UN goal for the next decade, and is something our federal government has signed on for, even if our provincial doesn't seem to care about it.
So I'm wondering, is there no movement to, like, nature trusts to work in alliance, because these are protecting lands. They are in private ownership, but there must be some discussion about this. You wouldn't give your land over to the Nature Trust, but you'd be recognized and would be acclaimed for protecting some land and biodiversity. That seems to be something that someone would take on as a cause.
It's certainly something that we've talked about, and I've talked about in other groups, and even in a basic way, you know, have a pretty sign that you can stick out up front that says sustainable forestry practiced here, or biodiversity protected, or it hasn't sort of gotten any legs yet for something to do. I don't know.
It's interesting.
So just to say quickly that for a little while I was kind of hot on the trail of the carbon trading, not because I think that carbon credit trading is a great idea at this point, but because if you were going to do it, you would sign an agreement that you would not be cutting your forests for the next 40 to 100 years. So it was actually a way to possibly give landowners a little bit of money in return for protecting in a very serious way. So I talked with Dale Prest in New Brunswick, who knows quite a lot about this. And he basically said, Nova Scotia, although in theory it has a carbon credit trading market instead of a carbon tax, it's not trading with any province or state outside itself, and it's basically not really doing anything. So there is no carbon market right now, and there's nowhere to go with this. And he encouraged me to follow a different idea, which is how to have a BIOS clubs for sustainable firewood. Like, he really had very little hope for that until something changes. And was about to work when Doug Ford canceled Ontario. As a participant in the carbon credit market.
Sorry, I just sort of started asking questions there. Does anyone else have any right now? Tina, great.
I have 2 questions actually. So maybe if you don't mind, Nina, I'll just sort of give them both, and then you can just speak to them. And they're related. They both have to do with the campaigning you were describing around the silent season. So the first one is, I agree that it's a great idea to be writing to the federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I'm wondering whether or not the Healthy Forest Coalition is planning to write to Lands and Forestry here in the province, because although they don't have enforcement power over the Migratory Birds Convention Act, they certainly have the power to determine what happens on Crown lands, at least. So, I mean, it obviously doesn't speak to the problem of what happens on the lands of private woodlot owners. But with respect to Crown lands, they are fully empowered to say in licensing agreements, for example, or to say with respect to harvesting plans that they're not going to allow harvesting on Crown lands in those times. And so I guess I'm wondering if that's something the coalition has considered and whether they might want to advocate in that way. And then the other question I have is, I mean, it's more of it's a sort of quick question, but I guess I'm wondering if the coalition is aware of the fact that the federal government is planning to amend the regulations under the Migratory Birds Convention Act to in fact make it, well, they're loosening the restrictions really, and they're making it a little bit easier for foresters to comply with the regulations against disturbing or destroying nests. And so we're actually in a moment where we're seeing the federal government poised to make things even easier for harvesters out in forests. And I think that that's something that's, you might want to mention in the campaigning. If you're writing letters to the federal minister, I mean, that context I think is important, and be happy to speak to that more if it's something that your group hasn't already been considering, but I guess I'm wondering if it's on your radar.
I didn't realize they were going ahead with that. Some members of our group had been part of commenting on those proposed amendments, which I think one of the most worst was that it would allow the removal of nests, not live occupied nests, but it's incredibly difficult to prove and find nests. So one of the ways it was going to make it kind of easier for industry was to start letting them kind of mess with stuff. To tell you the truth, in coming up with this email, we tried to keep it really short and really simple because it needed to be a very plain, direct approach. And I think we might need to do a follow-up around any attempt to amend it. And that this functions partly to educate people a little bit about the Migratory Bird Convention Act. And then if we hear that they are changing it, then we need to address that. That was just, and so and as far as the sending it to DLF, to the Department of Lands and Forestry, what we suggested to people was that they send it to their MLA. Our experience with the Department of Land and Forestry, along with pretty much everybody else who has tried to get anything going there, is that they are the biggest impediment to any kind of forestry reform. Not necessarily Minister Rankin himself, who actually might be slightly better of an ally than you would guess, but the bureaucrats of the Department of Land and Forestry are basically pulp mill connected, industry forestry connected, and they stand in the way of absolutely everything that they can. And they have been dragging their heels forever. And there's quite a lot of people who really know the innards of the government say, we don't know if we're going to get anywhere until this is basically cleaned out, gutted, perhaps rejoined with the Department of the Environment. It's really quite stunning what's gone on there. The Medway Community Forest Co-op, the Department of Lands and Forestry sat on their proposed management plan for 2.5 or 3 years, which made it impossible for them to do anything because they just wanted to obstruct. And that's sort of how it's been. It's part of the true grimness of trying to get change around forestry. Because when you think about it, a huge number of people were involved in the consultations for the natural resource strategy. People were really excited to have a voice to say, hey, enough with all this horrible clear cutting. We really hate what's happened to our forests. And then in 2016, the government, Liberal government, just said, oh, never mind about that, and ditched it. And then they commissioned the Leahy report, and the Leahy report came out, and here we are, 40,000 acres later of clear cutting. And there's tiny bits of movement begin to happen, but one of the main things they've done is relabel clear cutting as variable retention, 10, 20, or 30%, and uniform shelter wood. And variable retention 10% means they take 90% of the trees and they leave 10%. It's meaningless. It's a clear cut. Even 30%, it doesn't, there's no protection in that. It's really, I'm sorry, I feel like I should be being more inspiring about this, but the inspiring part is all the people who come together to try and find a way through.
Yeah.
The uninspiring part is what we're up against.
How do you hold up under the weight of grief, I'm sure, and anger and frustration? How do you cope with all those tumultuous feelings?
Thank you for asking that. Something happened to me a couple of years ago to make me devote a lot more of my time and effort in this direction. And it was because I realized that the thing that has sustained me my whole life, which is the joy of the natural world, that I now had this moment. I would look up, we have barn swallows, and I would look up and I would feel this moment of delight looking at the swallows, and then I would feel this lurch of grief and guilt and anger. And I wasn't being fed by what's always fed me. You know, I felt really lost and despairing. And at some point I just thought, well, then I have to do what I can. And so that's the only answer for me, is that I can look at the swallows and say, I'll do what I can. And that's it. I'll do what I can. You know, whether or not it's enough, whether or not whatever, I'll do what I can.
That's kind of the way we operate as a network, is we do what we can, not for the issues that concern us, but for the issues that concern people like you. I think I probably said that to you recently, but we do want to be behind people like you, and we want to be behind the coalition. Who is the coalition? Is it made up of a group?
It's really individuals. Well, it's actually my wife mowing the lawn outside. Okay. Maybe she has retreated a little bit. Of all the noises I thought you might hear, dogs barking, sheep baaing, I wasn't really thinking lawnmower.
Thought it was some weird hacker barging in.
Nah, just the weird wife with the lawnmower.
Oh, that's
it's
good.
even an electric lawnmower, what can I say? The coalition is a mix of individuals and groups.
Yeah.
And perhaps in a way that sounds a little familiar, it's not, it really is a loose coalition. So I was able to say, hey, I have this idea to do this for the birds. What do people think? And the people within the working group said, hey, that sounds great, you know, especially if you're going to do most of the work. And then, you know, 4 or 5 people stepped forward and said, okay, we'll help, you know, in the close up. And so then we had a little 5-person working group, and somebody else came in from outside and gave us the wonderful photographs. So that's how it works. Other people are involved in other long-term projects. We try to do stuff like respond when the high production forestry proposal came out, which is a dreadful clear cut and spray as much as possible industry proposal. that's come through. What really has impressed me is that there's a tremendous depth of information. You know, there are biologists and there are lawyers and there's there are activists in different ways. There are writers, there are photographers. There's an array of different skills that are really pretty amazing. The person who's kind of heading it up right now is a guy called Mike Lancaster, for whom the forests are just deeply important. And he actually works, I think, for the St. Margaret's Bay Stewardship, something. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, you know, can we invited you to be connected to the network so that you can use our Facebook page and whatever. But would it be, you know, we always have to think about how are we beneficial in all of this. And so, you know, we spread the word as much as we could about the For the Birds campaign. And one of the aspects to that was the fact that we really have, you know, because we're a group of people who, you know, one of our uniqueness comes with the fact that we're a spiritual group of people of faith. So we have access to education of numbers of people across the province, but we also know that if people have a love for the earth, if they have a love for the trees, for the birds, if there's a sense of awe and wonder, then that heightens the stake. You talked about that right at the beginning, how, you know, being in the crook of a tree was a very important part of who you were, but, you know, in your earlier years. Are you still climbing trees?
I lean against them more than I climb them.
But then they...
Yes, Eva also would like you to review the emails you would like us to send. So we're really clear on that.
Okay.
So
okay.
Here you're saying in terms of, we need you to tell us what you really need. And Eva's saying she would like you to clarify about the emails, 2 emails. Is that what you know? I got it right?
Marion, do you think it would work to share the basic letter that we have with everyone rather than me? I mean, I can read it to you right now if you would like.
No, I think we can share it, and then because I think did I post it too? I'm trying to remember. It seems like a month ago, but it was only a week.
Like it again, you know.
But the basic, yeah. If you share the basic letter, I'll make sure that that's accessible in a variety of ways.
Where do you want me to share it? On the Facebook?
If you just send it to me, I can, yeah, actually do it on the Facebook page. But if you just send it to me by email too, I can send it out in a variety of ways and forms to a lot of people. And we can actually have it inserted in our newsletter, which is going out around the 1st of July.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay. So I will send you again you had asked me for the basic text in Word of the send out without the photographs. And I will send you that again. Yes?
Okay. Yeah, and actually, if you attach a couple of photographs this time, we can put that in the newsletter.
Great.
Well, the contest will be closed down by then, but the letter writing, and so that, you know, we can work at educating people or provide avenues for you to educate them. Like what you said, like, you know, I thought I had a fair handle on this, but I learned a lot from you tonight.
Yeah.
And I'd like to, I just so wanted, and I wish I had recorded you from the beginning and asked your permission to post that. But my next question is, are there some YouTube videos period that we could post like on our website and on the Facebook page that will give people a basic understanding and education around those issues?
I don't know the answer to that.
Or can we make one?
Well, that's an interesting idea.
Maybe I could do an interview with you.
Oh, I love that idea.
Sure,
Mm.
we could do that.
Okay.
Maybe I'd have figured out how many, what percentage of woodlot of private woodlot owners there were by then.
One thing that's also really important of this is this has been the history of forestry in Nova Scotia. It has been a long battle, and there's been some wins, and it's always been very dreadful in a lot of ways. I mean, they came in and cut all the forests off Yarmouth for the Napoleonic Wars. It started a long time ago, and it's been going on and on and on. And so that's not encouraging or not. I think that's encouraging. People have cared all the time to struggle for this. So that's the positive way I'm thinking about it. The biodiversity, I have to tell you, scares the hell out of me. But, you know, this has been a struggle that people have put their lives on for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I have another Zoom to go to. I just want to thank you, Nina. I found that very, very informative and inspiring. So thank you, and see you all next week.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining in.
Good to
Okay.
see you, Carol.
And,
Wonderful, Marion.
Pardon?
Interview would be wonderful.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. And so maybe we could do that like next week.
mhm.
And then we can post that. And it could be beneficial to the Healthy Forest Coalition because it's just kind of public domain.
Yes.
And so, Tina, I'm wondering, do you have any advice for us as a network of almost 500 and several thousand Anglicans in Nova Scotia, how, you know, from your take of it, what kind of simple doable actions that we might take to support the cause?
Sorry, just to be clear, you're asking me?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the campaigns that Nina described sound great, honestly, and I mean, yeah, they sound strong, and I mean, and Nina, the explanation you gave for why you're sort of feeling fed up with lands and forestry makes sense, and I hear that. I think, I mean, quite frankly, not to sound too pessimistic, but I often think that letter writing campaigns to government, they're exercises of hope and idealism more often than not. So I tend to fall on the side of might as well write those letters, even if you don't expect they're going to do much, because I often feel like that's what's going to be the result of any letter writing campaign. But that doesn't mean those campaigns shouldn't happen, because I mean, whatever political result they have, they also, as you say, serve an enormous purpose in terms of public education and consciousness raising and building those kinds of connections. And so, but I would certainly just echo all the comments that Nina has made and say that those campaigns sound great. And if at any point the Healthy Forest Coalition is looking to beef up that campaigning in a way that you might want to write, you know, more robust letters that have some legal analysis thrown in or anything like that, I mean, please do feel free to contact me at East Coast Environmental Law. I'll put my email here in the chat, because you know, we'd be happy to help you know, give some input into writing. If you wanted, you know, I think the short form letter that you were describing sounds great, but if you're wanting at any point to have a letter that might have a little bit more of that kind of legal aspect to it, we'd be happy to put together something like that for folks to use as well.
Thank you. I think that would actually be great, because I think we do need to do a follow-up on the Migratory Bird Convention Act because of that push to weaken it. I also want to just throw in that there is a petition. So part of working in a little network is that we sort of agreed we'd launch this, and then somebody else has taken on launching a petition to get a silent season. And so I posted that onto your Facebook network, and I can repost it there. And if people see that and would also like to sign that, that would be great.
Right.
I sometimes think that, you know, all of these things, you need to do them. I should probably say I'm also a member of Extinction Rebellion, and that means that I think in the end that nonviolent direct action is one of the better ways to finally get some movement. And naturalists have told me that we would not have succeeded in protecting the Corbett Dalhousie Lake forest solely on the basis of having found a migratory bird on her nest. I mean, the guy who found the bird said, no, it was because you guys were camped out on the road and the government saw it was going to get a really embarrassing, tricky situation, and it decided to back down. It also backed down because the guy who runs Westfall was on CBC and said, I quote, in a brilliant article, a brilliant interview with Portia, ended up saying, well, yes, it's inevitable. Nests would be destroyed when you are logging in the woods in that season. And that was like, oh, that was kind of embarrassing that you said that. So yeah, letters and petitions, but it all counts, right? And we all do what we can. And, you know, I don't know, I think every bit that someone feels like doing is worth it.
Yeah, I would really, I'd really like to educate our constituency on this.
Yeah, I think so.
And so, you know, we have generally anywhere from kind of like 10 to 25 people on these nights. We're going to wind down for the summer because, and then pick back up in the fall, because I think that, you know, the weather, it was a hot day today. And so people are, you know, still just trying to cool off. But anyway, we have other means and ways of communicating with a variety of people in a variety of ways. And so, yeah, so we'll talk about the interview next week.
And I really want to thank you. You have been just a champ. I am not a social media savvy person. And I had remembered from our meeting in March that you were. And I was like, I know who I should talk to. And no, you've been great, because really I was like, oh, this is really guesswork here. So I've been incredibly appreciative of your help. It's been really terrific.
Thanks. That's what we're here for. You know, that is really what we're here for. So
That's good.
Okay.
Just watching the time before Marion says, watch the time, Nancy. And thank you. Oh, yes. Yes. Even just reminding everybody, thank you, Nina. This is great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for doing this. We are going to pick up in the fall in September when we start a thing in the church called Season of Creation, when every Sunday is to be devoted to caring for this planet.
Great.
Right. And we're finished tonight. Margaret will be with us next week.
Yep.
Thank you, Nina. It looks like there's, yes. Okay. We'll talk to you later, Mary.
And everybody's welcome to come the following week for an evaluation session to see how where we're going from here.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Blessings, everybody. Thanks.